Okay, welcome everyone. My name is Joyce Raimondo. Some of you I know by now. I'm the education coordinator at the Pollock and Krasner House and Study Center in East Hampton, New York. So today we have a special theme and a special guest artist, Ellen Bartley. And we're going to get a tour of Pollock and Krasner's studio and have an overview of their work and a little background about the artist. And then I am going to walk over to the house where they lived. And Helen Harrison, the director, is going to speak a little bit about the library and what's on their bookshelves. And then we have a really wonderful presentation by artist Ellen Bartley, who photographed the books and then used those images in collages and other artworks as well. So Ellen will tell us about that later, and we'll have some Q&A. Okay, and bonus, at the end, we might get a special peek into the Picasso and Pollock exhibit coming up that's actually being installed today. Okay, so let's get started. I'm going to do a little screen share. Most of you, I'm sure, are familiar with Pollock's famous drip painting technique. So this is groundbreaking art. He's dripping paint from sticks instead of applying it with a brush, and he's actually not even touching the canvas. He's working very large at times, and as you can see, it's 100% abstract art. He's not referencing anything outside the painting necessarily. So he's not starting with a title or a theme or a subject. It's called action painting because Pollock was moving as he was painting, and his movement is captured on the canvas itself. I love this one because you can see the viewer and you are part of the painting. Marcel Duchamp said the viewer completes the artwork. So the viewer gets to find personal meaning in modern art. And when you look at Ellen's images today, unlike a scholarly presentation where you're learning facts about the books, you're going to get to have your own interpretations about what the images might spark off for you or what they mean to you. And it's always fun to listen to each other. So Pollock's paintings, of course, are in collections all over the world. He was famous in his own lifetime. He sold a painting for $8,000. And after he died, one painting sold for $200 million. There's a picture of Peggy Guggenheim, his patron, way in the background. And Peggy was an heiress to a fortune, and she used her fortune to support avant-garde, up-and-coming young artists such as Pollock. Lee Krasner, Pollock's wife, managed his career. So she negotiated with Peggy Guggenheim to get a monthly stipend. So Pollock did not have to work at a job or worrying about selling his paintings. And Peggy also lent them the money for the down payment on the house so they could move from New York City to the Springs. So here are examples of Pollock's drip painting. And of course, Pollock did many other kinds of paintings, but this is what he is best known for. And this all happened right here in this barn. There's Lee Krasner, also a noted, very, very important artist. And here's an example of one of Pollock's works. And this is an example of Lee Krasner's also action painter, abstract artist, and collage artist. So what Lee did to create this image is she ripped up an old painting and then she reassembled it to make a brand new composition. And then she would paint back into the image as well. So this one is called The City. And we will see later how Ellen, you might say, takes inspiration from Lee or incorporates this important history into her own images. Okay, so let's go around and see what's in the barn. Now I am in this first room here, and many of the items in the barn studio belong to Lee. This is her cart. Those are painting boots. Lee worked here after Pollock's death. they did not work here together. Pollock died in 1956. He was 44 years old. He was drinking and driving. And unfortunately, he took another life with him, Edith Metzger. And his mistress was in the car but survived. Anyway, a year after Pollock's death, Lee came in here and used this studio as her own. Those are her pigments up there. These are her mosaic pieces. She was also a mural artist and a mosaic artist. And when you come in here, you get a very intimate look into the artist process. Now, if you would, this is an abbreviated tour today. If you would like the full tour, you can come back at another time. We have other Zoom programs where I go into more detail. Here's Lee's apron. So it's like we're visiting them. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put on these little slippers here. And you can come to visit. And we're going to walk right into the barn, putting on these clean slippers that you will get when you come visit. It's pkhouse.org, and you do need to make an appointment. And of course, we do get booked up quickly. So here we are in the barn. And this is Pollock's now famous floor filled with drips and splatters. So why did Pollock put the painting on the floor? Well, for one thing, some of them were very large, but there was another reason. He worked from all four sides. He said, similar to the Indian sand painters of the West. He had seen these Native American artists dribbling sand at the Museum of Modern Art. That was one of his inspirations. Okay, this is just the accidental spills and splatters. This is not a work of art. However, it is a national landmark. You really get a feeling for the artist's process when you come here. Pollock was very intentional when he painted. He wasn't just flinging paint in a frenzy. He actually painted very slowly and methodical. This is a photo taken in 1950 by Hans Namath. You can also see videos on YouTube that Hans Namath took that really show his process, the real Jackson Pollock painting. So gravity is pulling the paint down. Wherever it lands, it stays. Pollock is working from all four sides, as I said, and he's doing something else that's unusual. He's not actually touching the painting. He's actually working in the space above the painting, and he's using non-art materials. He's using house paints. He's using the brush as a stick, at times squirting paint from basters, or using the stirrer as a tool to drip paint. This is revolutionary. Where did he come up with this idea? Well, artists don't work in a vacuum. Pollock studied with Siqueiros, the Mexican muralist in New York City. And Siqueiros, in his workshops, taught his students to use industrial materials. But Siqueiros was painting representational images. Pollock took that idea a step further, eliminating the image completely. Okay? So a year after Pollock's death, Lee Krasner came into the studio. Here she is. She pins her canvases on the wall. She did not paint on the floor. And when you come in here, it's fun. If you really are familiar with her artworks, you can actually see the splatters like up there. And then you can match up the colors to the exact spot where she made that painting. She's also an action painter. She's filled with energy, using her whole body, almost like in a dance of paint. Occasionally she used ladders, but she did prefer to use her body and large brushes so that she could literally get in the flow, okay? Now, how is it this floor belonged to Jackson Pollock if Lee was in here years after him painting? Where's her marks on the floor? Well, it turns out when they were both alive, and here it's shown in this photo, they covered the floor with white boards. They winterized, they improved the studio, and it remained that way. Lee Krasner worked in here until she was an older woman, and she arranged before her death that this would become a museum under the auspices of Stony Brook University. So she died in 1984. In 1987, the museum conservators came in here, took the boards off, took the paper off, and underneath they found Pollock's floor preserved forever. And that's why it's untouched by anybody else. So it really is fun when you come here and you see this for yourself. It's extraordinary because you can just walk right in there. Okay? Any questions? Any comments? Would anyone like to add any ideas? Okay, I'm going to put my slippers away and we're going to go into the house. Now, by the way, Pollock was an alcoholic. He was sober for 2 years when he made his best paintings. And he didn't drink and paint at the same time. Drinking did not help his creativity. When he started drinking again, he became really very, very depressed. And this led to him actually not painting at all almost the last year of his life. And he had very, very erratic behavior while he was under the influence of alcohol. And that led to his untimely death. So, and the death of a young woman. So that's kind of a myth that alcoholism fuels creativity. So there's the barn behind me. And as you could see, this property is really beautiful. In the background there is Accabonac Creek. The barn was originally there, and Pollock and his buddies moved it here because they didn't want to block this beautiful view. All that land beyond the platform, the foundation of the barn, that's all a nature preserve thanks to Lee Krasner. And here we have an outhouse because when they moved here, this was an old dilapidated farmhouse. There was no plumbing, there was no central heat. There were 200 people in the entire town of Springs, fishermen, farmers. This was true rural country living. It was probably a shock to Lee Krasner, who was from Brooklyn. And she said it was really hard that first year, but there's many advantages for artists living here. It's close to New York City, right? You can hop on a train and get back to New York. You have a community of artists, dealers, collectors, critics. And the light is remarkable. So if you take a look, you see the brightness of the light because it bounces off the water, all the bays and the ocean, and it's spectacular. And it's always attracted artists ever since the Long Island Railroad could cart artists out here. So we do have, as you can see, cartons, and this is all a work in progress. So we're changing the exhibit right now, and it's actually a really good tie-in because this is going to be about Jackson Pollock, how he was inspired and influenced by Picasso. And Mary Ellen discovered many, many books on Pollock's shelves that seemed kind of worn and weathered that were actually about Picasso. So it's just the perfect tie-in. Now, let me see where Helen Harrison, the director, is. Okay, so bear with me and I'm going to grab Helen. Okay, everybody. So Helen Harrison, the director, is going to present a brief overview of some information about Pollock's books, and then Mary Ellen will share.
Hi, everybody. Well, come on into the library, or this is the parlor, where we have their book collection and their record collection, and that's behind me here. Now, the library contains about 300 books. These are books that belong to both of them, both Jackson and Lee, and it's a very interesting collection because there are a lot of art books and there are also fiction. And there are even some books that were here in the house when they bought it. So not everything was brought in by them, but most of them were. And we have some things here that were published, of course, after Jackson died, because Lee Krasner lived here until 1984. So she outlived him by 28 years. Some of the books were hers before she moved in with him. And like, for example, here we have a biography of Leon Trotsky, who was the communist leader. And that was given to her by her boyfriend before Jackson, a guy named Igor Pantuhov, and it's inscribed to her from Igor. They were both Russian by extraction. Well, he was actually born in Russia and she was born in Brooklyn of Russian parents, but they were very interested in the Russian Revolution. They were both very left-wing. And so he gave her the biography of Trotsky. We also have some fiction up on the top shelf there. You can just about see it. Books written by friends of theirs that are inscribed to them. And of course, the Picasso books that Mary Ellen was so interested in that she will tell you about. Picasso, there was a big Picasso retrospective in New York in 1939, and that was something that Pollock was very interested in. But here you have a copy of, this is a book that was given to Jackson by his first dealer and patron, Peggy Guggenheim. And it's inscribed to him, to Jackson, with 4 years love, Peggy Guggenheim. And on the cover of the book, which is falling apart, unfortunately, is what appears to be Pollock's handprint. It looks like he leaned on the book when he had a paint-covered hand and left an impression on it. So it's kind of an interesting artifact in its own right, as well as being an example of how Peggy perceived the importance of Picasso in Pollock's creative life. Also a very interesting book here on Miro, who was also influential on Pollock. He had a retrospective at the Museum of Modern Art in 1941. And this book was written by Pollock's and Krasner's friend, the critic Clement Greenberg, and it's also inscribed to Lee and Jackson, as ever, Clem. So this is something that an artist's library is so revealing because it shows you what they were interested in, who their friends were, how they assimilated different influences and what things attracted them. You've also got the catalog raisonné of Pollock's work, which was compiled in the 1970s. And up on the very top shelf, although it's kind of hard to see from here, there's a whole collection of books that's a compendium of Native American art that was compiled in the 1890s up to the early 20th century. And those books were used by Jackson to find motifs that interested him. He was very interested in Native American art from his childhood in Arizona and California. And when he came to New York, he would visit the Museum of the American Indian as often as he would go to MoMA. And he was very taken with the idea of the spiritual content of Native art, that a lot of the pictographic symbolism had to do with spiritual matters. And he was using those motifs in his pictographic works in the 1930s and 40s. So many of his paintings, you can actually see symbolic imagery that is very much derived from Native American art.
Thank you so much, Helen. And Helen is a treasure trove of so many details about Jackson Pollock's day-to-day life. And, you know, I'm learning so much because sometimes I've never actually looked at each individual book here. So thank you so much, Helen. I'm just going to give a little walkthrough of the upper shelf. You see that? And Mary Ellen will show us photographs, of course, close up. So I'll just back up so you can see the whole view, okay? And we will have some upcoming Zoom programs about this wonderful exhibit that explores Pollock's relationship to Picasso. Okay, so here's an example of one of the images. So check back with the website for that, pkhouse.org. So now I'm so excited. Mary Ellen is going to share her work, particularly about this project. So Mary Ellen is an artist and a photographer. And Mary Ellen will tell us about her specific project that she did here at the house. So ready, Mary Ellen?
Let me just drag this. So, hi. Thanks for inviting me, Joyce. This is really nice to go back and revisit this work that I did in 2017. The late, great Ruth Appelhoff had mentioned to me that I should come and check out the library at the Pollock and Krasner house, because I had done work at Grey Gardens with the books that were left there from the Beals in East Hampton. And I had also done a photographic series when I was an artist in residence at the Watermill Center with Robert Wilson's books. So this was another local treasure, and a local library that I might be able to find some inspiration from. So I went and I met Helen, and she showed me the Parlor library and also these incredible damaged resin 78 records that were left up in the attic and that have an entire story of their own, which we'll leave for another time. But I started working on the books and the records, and spent, I don't know, I guess a few months on and off coming and trying to devise a project. And I was very struck by the tactility and the age and the intimacy of the books. And I wanted to collaborate with them in some way. I wanted to find a way to represent these books that had, of course, a lot of content and that maybe inspired Lee and Jackson a lot, but I wasn't going to treat it as a scholarly exercise. I didn't want to say this definitely happened and A led to B. I wanted to just bring up some questions and to hint at the life of these books and what they mean to people then and now, and their physical presence. So I was poking around. I went first right to the Picasso books. They just seemed like the most used and the most interesting in a way, because they're small. They're printed in the 30s. They were black and white and so different from the actual paintings, which later, everyone in New York was able to see through the modern and other exhibits. This is a book that I ended up working with. But first, I was just kind of finding this motif of abstraction in different ways before I settled on my approach. Whenever I go to a library, I kind of feel like I have to spend some time there and figure out how am I going to make a series that represents this collection and is also thematically tied, conceptually tied to the life of these books. This was an old, worn, tattered dust jacket. There's a lot of dust jackets in the library because it was from the era of publishing, a lot of them 40s and 50s, where the dust jacket was a very big part of hardcover publishing. And so I started to get this feeling of sort of deterioration, abstraction, but I wasn't quite there yet. And I was seeing this striping, I liked that. And then I think I saw the cover of, this was a catalog of Lee Krasner's work, collages from Robert Miller Gallery. And a little light bulb went off, the collage element, and that the fact that it was a cover itself. And also this really nice album cover had a graphic striping collagey feel to it. So I think those two things sort of jogged something. And I decided to take very straight photographs of the books and then start cutting them up. And this is my little setup. I ended up shooting straight down and very simple surface with natural light just to capture the covers right in the library. And this is an example of a beautifully worn Ulysses. And then I went, and this is what I did was I took 2 photographs, same size, same image. One I cut, and then I laid the cut pieces on top of the intact photograph and made these collages, which I then glued and rephotographed, and that's sort of the finished image. And it was a way also to sort of reference this post-era modern aesthetic in design. A lot of times shorthand was used in graphic design to indicate improvisation or angst or the fractured nature of, alienated man in this sort of post-war atomic age. So it was something that spoke to that in a design sense and also in a cultural sense, because, Joyce worked with his own abstraction, and of course Picasso. So abstraction runs through it, and also this idea of fracturing and making things a little less literal and a little less decipherable. There's this story, I have to read this quote because it's a good one. I never do this, but I found this in Ellen Landau's book on Jackson Pollock. It says, Krasner was shocked to find that Pollock kept his library not on shelves, but hidden in drawers in a closet at the back of the studio. He didn't want anyone knowing what he was reading, Lee commented. The first time Jackson ever put his books in public was in 1945, when I made him build the bookcases in the house in Springs. So there's also this idea of kind of hiding something and transforming something that is very literal. This is just a photograph of that great Picasso book with, I guess Helen thinks it's a handprint, maybe. I thought it was a footprint, especially since he, worked on the floor. So we'll have to get some forensic evidence about that. And so I'm just going to go through. This is a catalog, and I worked with the books not so much that were maybe a scholar's most connected or revealing books, but books that also had a beauty and a graphic sense that I could work with. This is a Dylan Thomas collected poems, which is kind of an iconic cover. A lot of people know it, and here it is kind of jumbled. It's El Greco. It's just incredibly worn. I just think about, Jackson and Lee, just like, looking at this book time and again. It was obviously very well used. And this is sort of an iconic design. And I just want to say that I added color to the backgrounds. That was a Photoshop thing. Everything else was pretty mechanical, but that was an addition just to add to the interest of the images. There's a Miro. And after I had pretty much gotten all the covers that I could collage in that way, I was left with a lot of other books that I just love certain things about. I really love the materiality and some of the color. So I wanted to do a little more, and I made these more minimalist collages, which is kind of more my style. And just taking pieces and little moments that are left on these books. Giacometti. And then I just had to give you some idea of the other project, which was the records. This is a stack of the records that were left in the attic, the unweatherized attic, and they're just remarkable and sculptural. And I haven't finished this project. I want to return, if Helen will let me, and do more with the records. Here's the record player. That's it.
Thank you so much, Mary Ellen. So I'm always amazed when I see your work, seriously. It's so elegant to me. Just visually stunning. So does anybody have any questions that you would like to ask Mary Ellen or myself? Or any comments, ideas? And we're gonna wait and just so you can wonder about something. Lisa says, beautiful work.
Thank you, Lisa.
Well, I have a question.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
I wanted to know if Mary Ellen's work is on exhibit anywhere.
Mhm.
Yeah, well, this work has been exhibited in the drawing room in East Hampton, in New York at Yancey Richardson, and in Berlin. But
Oh.
this particular work is not on exhibit right now.
Mhm.
Oh, it will be though. There's I'm putting one of them in the spring show, in the
Oh.
Spring's Invitational. Yeah, I'm putting one in. I just dropped it off today.
Oh, which can
The
you
Ulysses.
can you backtrack?
To find it, sure.
Yeah. And the Springs Invitational is a yearly show that invites local artists. And, you know, Lee and Pollock used to be in the Springs Invitational. And
That's the one that's in
the
it.
opening is on Friday night.
You don't see this
Oh.
this bar in my screen share, do you? This toolbar? I'm just curious because it's right in the middle of my. No, good.
And let's see, we have Toya says, Mary Ellen, your works are amazing. Natalie says, very stunning. Thank you for sharing. What
Thank
books would you photograph and collage from your own home? Interesting question. If you were doing a study of your own life as an artist.
Well, interesting you asked that. I have done a series of my own photography books.
Can you move the screen share so we could see you a little larger?
Oh,
You mentioned that you worked with Edie Beale, the Beale sisters,
yeah.
um,
Yeah, so
the famous house in East Hampton. So what was that like, Mary Ellen?
well, you know, I had seen something posted on social media about these books that were in great gardens. And I had actually been there photographing a garden once and noticed these cool books in the sunroom, but I didn't give it any thought. And then I found out that they were the original books of the Beales that Sally Quinn had actually saved from a dumpster when they were renovating the very messy house. She saved the books. She put them on the shelves with her own books. She had them just like lightly cleaned, and they were in just extraordinary states of decay. And they were a time capsule in so many ways. So I was allowed to go in right before the house was sold and just have my way with these books. And it was a really fast-paced and really interesting project.
And I saw those as well, Mary. Are those on your website?
Yes.
And what is your website?
It's just my name, MaryEllenBartley.com.
And any other questions about anything? Well, I will keep asking questions because I can come up with lots of questions. Mary Ellen, what about, like, how did you start photographing books? Like, were you photographing other objects before, and then you just sort of, how did you come to this?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I used to be a commercial food photographer for many years in New York, but I always had a love of still life. And I was always kind of searching for the right objects to photograph that I could return to again and again, that wouldn't wouldn't be too specific, that would have an ability to be sort of abstract. And after I had seen the Morandi painting show, Giorgio Morandi was a painter I always loved. I started making these very simple still lifes of white paperbacks, and that's how it all started. And once I still do things that are much more studio work that's not about other people's books or books with necessarily content, more visual. But I find that doing these sort of on-site residencies and things, it really pushes me in different ways because I don't get to choose the books. I have to come up with an approach, a strategy to make something interesting with what's there. And it is always interesting. And there's always like some moment after I'm struggling where I get an idea and I'm like, okay, that's it.
I like that. Any other
I have
questions?
a question.
Yes, go ahead.
Mary Ellen, how long does it take you to come up with an idea? You see a book that you decide to, how long does it take you to work from the beginning to the end of that project?
No, that's a good question. I don't know. It depends on the project, but I pretty much do one residency a year, where I go somewhere with an interesting archive and collection, and then I do one studio thing a year. So pretty much I do 2 projects a year.
Okay, we have another question here. What size are the finished collaged photos?
Oh, they're about 1620, so a little larger than life.
And we have some feedback. Linda says, I enjoyed seeing your collages. Thank you for sharing them with us. And Lisa says, I loved hearing about your process and how you want to collaborate with the books. I like that. It's like you're collaborating with the books.
Yeah, I think there's also this indirect collaboration with the book's owners. I feel this like I insinuate my way into their private stuff, and I get to sort of collaborate them in this indirect way. I find that really interesting.
Now, I'm curious, everybody. I'm going to throw this question back out to the participants. And I'm wondering, in an open-ended way, there's no right or wrong answers. When you see Mary Ellen's images, what comes to your mind? Remember, I said at the beginning that the viewer completes the artwork, and this is art, right? So it's combining, in a sense, history with art. But what comes to your mind? What sorts of thoughts fill your mind? Any interpretations on what you see?
I thought I would like to do pictures of some of the things that I've collected. It made me feel like I'd like to try doing something with some of my collections.
What's in your collection, Elaine?
Well, I have some American Indian art pottery, and I have another collection of paperweights, different, really different, and other pottery, so that I feel like I would like to do something with it besides just the objects.
Mary Ellen, any thoughts on that? Any feedback?
I think it's so interesting to look at a collection and make an interpretive archive. Like you're personally saying, this is interesting to me about this object or this collection. This is, you know what I mean? So you could say the things were lost forever, like the Grey Garden books. They're gone now. They're not collected anywhere. They're in someone's basement and they're dispersed. But there is this new archive of them. I mean, it's through my lens and my perspective, but they exist. They're saved in a place. So say you have all this pottery, and if you made your own interpretation, I think that's a really kind of worthwhile and interesting thing to do.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
I'm going to try it.
I like that. I see a book. I see
a book of pottery.
Objects. See, I always make more work for people, so watch out, Elaine. But I could see a book that you could like give to your relatives or whatever. I think I think it's a really good idea.
And I think I'd like to photograph that book. So when you're done, you got to call me up.
Definitely.
Anybody else? Any other thoughts of what comes to your mind or what your interpretation? What is it sort of spark jog of anything?
Yeah, I'd like to say something. I've been an abstract painter for about 15 years. And in the year of 2021, I I'm starting to sort of gravitate to collages. And it's amazing that Mary Ellen showed us this today, because my abstract paintings are, some of them are 50 by 50. We're talking about 50 inches by 50 inches, and some of them are 36. But I'm thinking I want to do, she has inspired me to do in a collage type of way, to put it on canvas. And I don't know how you would, I haven't figured it out yet. I want to put it on canvas in a huge way of things that I see from day to day. You know, I was looking at some artwork by Esteban Vincente, and he was into collages, and it sort of kind of sparked something deep inside of me that
That's
I
cool.
think I'm missing something. I'm missing something with my abstract, and that I think I need to venture out and get away from the acrylic painting, and maybe do mix the acrylic painting also with the collage or cutting up strips. But I want to do something that I'm really glad that I tuned in today
That's so
to
nice.
this. I would have missed a great opportunity to listen to someone that really is into collages. And thank you, Mary Ellen. That's all I have to
Hey,
say.
you're welcome. But you should really check out Lee Krasner's collages, because she
Okay.
actually tore up her old paintings and reworked them, and also tore up, when Jackson destroyed his work, she repurposed it in collages as well. I think that's a great, another great way to use collage, to sort of repurpose things. And it sounds like, especially if you're frustrated, right?
Yes.
That's-
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks.
Excellent. You know what?
Thanks for sharing.
Yeah, it's also like very physical when you do collage sometimes, right? Because
Can
it's
be, yeah.
sharing, it becomes an object.
Yeah, with photography, everything is so remote. So actually cutting a photograph and touching it, it is definitely more physical for photography.
So let's see, we have some comments in the chat. Laura says, I felt very calm and introspective when viewing Mary Ellen's work. Celine says, it makes me think of the books as a treasure shown to the viewer in a new light. It gives them a second life, preserving them longer. Natalie says, I think that the collage of Lee Krasner is such a beautiful tribute to her books, since she often made a sort of collage of cutting and putting her paintings back together. It makes me think of what Mary Ellen will do with the other books. Will same style or unique to the owner? Good question.
Yeah, I think it has to be. It's always unique to the collection. Yeah. But I have to get those records. I started doing collages with them, and I need to get my hands back on those records. Because then you get into the mosaics, because Lee and Jackson made these incredible mosaic tables, and they're round, and then there's all this round imagery to work with, and it's a whole other world.
And I'll tell you what, sometimes there's divine synchronicity. We never have Pollock's mosaic in this house. We happen to have one right now.
Really?
And
Let's see.
just arrived, I think, yesterday. So here is
Wow.
Pollock's mosaic mural, made for the PA, but never put on display.
So mosaic is a type of collage, I think.
Well, technically, collage means to glue, and mosaic it's embedded, right? So it's a little different, but it's related to collage for sure.
Yeah. It's about fractured things coming back together to form a new whole.
Absolutely. Yeah, and when Lee did her mosaic table, for example, she would use a lot of found object like keys and stuff like that. I'll tell you what, I could walk you a little through the house just to give you a little more of a view here. So this is the parlor, as we said before. And these works that are currently on view, these are by Pollock, and they're specifically about his influence from Picasso. So this is remarkable. I love this show, but we're going to discuss that another time. Again, here is the bookshelf, And then down here, as Mary Ellen showed, is a record player. And then here we have the collection of records.
See, collage, right there, ripped design.
Oh, is there one? Is there actually a book that says that?
Oh, look at Yancy, see, it's like ripped, it's the
Oh,
graphic
yeah,
design
You're right, Mary Ellen. Yeah, look at that.
everywhere.
You're right. I didn't see that. Also, by the way, in terms of Pollock's records, Pollock was influenced by jazz, but he loved jazz, but he didn't listen to music when he painted. It was quiet in that barn. And I'm coming upstairs now. We have 2 bathrooms in the house. When they first moved here, there was no bathroom. This is the guest room. And these 2 beds were their marital beds. They were originally in the master bedroom. And this was originally the master bedroom, and then of course later became Lee's room. This is a portrait of Lee by Igor Pontonov, her former boyfriend before she was married. Lee was inspired by nature. And actually, there's one book in this room. This is really funny. This is actually funny. What's this book? What does that say? There must be a pony. The glittering world of Hollywood becomes a terrifying jungle for a boy learning to become a man. Huh.
I think Lisa left that there when she was sleeping. And did you, Lisa?
Lisa was Lee's assistant. Lisa, do you want to add to this conversation?
I actually wasn't her assistant. She wouldn't allow me in the studio. So
I meant, but you assisted her with daily life?
Yes, I was her
That's what I meant. Would you like to add anything to the conversation?
Where did you sleep?
I slept at, that's what I was just trying to see. My room did not have 2 beds in it. It only had 1. And it was a corner, so it faced the street and then the driveway.
Yeah, well, this room over here, where these 2 beds are, this was just renovated, restored just a few years ago.
Okay.
Okay, so you were probably in this room.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I spent a lot of time in the library as well. I loved that space, and I loved it at this time of day also. And I also looked through the books. It was just so nice to be part of that history, which is what I feel looking at Mary Ellen's work, which I already love anyway. So it's just so nice to have that connection through those books, history of the house and them.
Yeah.
And what did you do with Lee? You came in the summer, or how did that work?
I went out for 1 summer. I was there as a substitute for another woman named Darby, and we were both interviewed for the book. And I drove her. I drove Lee everywhere. We went shopping together. We went to dinners, although I was not allowed to be present when company came. So I had to go to my room. I had to remain in the house, just in case she needed me. So I never went into the studio. I wasn't allowed in the studio.
Oh.
And the book, could you tell us about the book that was recently published, the title? And
oh, I have it right here.
Since we're talking about books, it's perfect tie-in.
Yeah.
It's called Lee and Me. Let me see that. Does it read?
Yeah, it's beautiful, actually. Yeah. And that's by Ruth Appelhoff.
Right. Yes.
And that book is really about people such as yourself, who assisted Lee in her day-to-day life, right?
Those interviews are at the end of the book. The book talked about her whole life, so I actually learned a lot more about her.
I can't wait to read that.
Yeah, it's really great. It was really very good. good book, good interviews. So I recommend it. And it's a nice title also. And also Ruth did her dissertation on Lee, and which is why she was at the house. And she also became her companion when she was
Chauffeur.
that. Yeah. Right. And chauffeur. Yeah.
Well, it's so nice meeting you. Maybe we'll have you back another time and we'll focus on that book. That could be a good program,
Yeah.
right? To gather people together.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Would anyone else like to share any thoughts? Andrea says, thank you, Joyce, for another wonderful program. And Mary Ellen, so great to gain insight into your project and process. The small room that Lee used before Pollock's death. And then she also used the garage later on and then eventually made her way into the barn. Mary Ellen, any closing thoughts?
Well, you've reignited my my interest in finishing my record project. So hopefully off season, I can come visit again.
Absolutely. Well, everyone, I would like to thank Mary Ellen. And I would like to thank Helen Harrison. And also I want to thank everyone for coming and for sharing, because I call these Zoom programs, it's like a cafe, you know, we're meeting on Zoom, and as people shared, really by seeing other artists, hearing other artists, the artist is really providing a service and a gift to humanity, because this is what sparks ideas and gives inspiration for people, right? It's like well, there's an expression, it's filling the well, right? With good nurturing things. So I can't wait to see what's on my bookshelf. I can't wait to see what would somebody think of my bookshelf. So I'm going to take inspiration on that. And Jane says, thank you to Mary Ellen, very inspiring. So everyone, I wish you the beautiful day and beautiful week. And again, Mary Ellen, thank you so much for sharing your.
Oh, so much my pleasure. Thanks for asking me.
Thank you.